Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into the hazy wetlands of ancient Egypt, where the air itself smells like crushed greenery and damp earth, and where perfumes were born not in gilded bottles, but in the mud and reeds of the Nile marshes. You picture yourself standing in the early morning mist, your sandals sinking slightly into the spongy ground, the calls of ibis and herons echoing above. The water laps softly at the edges of papyrus stands, each stalk tall and stiff, brushing against your arms as you move through. There's a certain peace here, broken only by the occasional splash of something that could either be a harmless fish or a crocodile you'd rather not identify. It's a strange beginning for something so refined as perfume, isn't it? You're not surrounded by shelves of elegant glass, but rather the buzzing of insects and the damp breath of the marsh. Still, this is where it all begins, in the Nile's gift of plants, flowers, and resins. You imagine reaching down and snapping off a stalk of papyrus, the white pith inside oozing slightly, smelling faintly green, like celery left in the sun too long. Not exactly ode to luxury, but trust the Egyptians, they knew how to coax wonders out of this. And yes, quick reality check. You probably wouldn't survive this environment for more than a few days. Between the insects, the heat, and the crocodiles that occasionally mistake legs for lunch, you'd tap out fast. The Egyptians, however, were masters of this space, able to navigate the marshes with a kind of practiced ease. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love for you to drop your location and your local time in the comments. I always find it fascinating to see where you all are drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning light sharpens, spreading across the marshy water, and you shuffle further in, hearing the rustle of reeds swaying. Your basket is empty for now, but you're about to fill it with plants that, if you had the patience and the know-how, could be transformed into something so alluring that nobles would dab it behind their ears or smear it onto their wigs. One fact you may not know, Egyptian perfumes weren't just for smelling nice. They were used for rituals, medicine, seduction, and even embalming. Some were sticky pastes, more like ointments, while others were watery concoctions. And here's a quirky tidbit. Papyrus, the plant that gave us paper, was also considered faintly fragrant when processed, though whether it smelled truly pleasant or just marshy is still up for debate. Historians still argue whether papyrus was ever a major perfume ingredient or simply a supporting note that added bulk to recipes. You crouch by the water's edge, pulling at tufts of sweet flag, a reed-like plant with aromatic roots. Crush it between your fingers, and it releases a scent not unlike ginger, sharp yet earthy. You imagine grinding a pile of these roots into powder, blending it later with oils. A breeze carries the smell of lotus, faint but unmistakable, sweet, heady, and slightly musky. The lotus flower was practically the celebrity of Egyptian fragrance, appearing in paintings, jewelry, and rituals. When the petals open in the morning sun, you feel a wash of perfume drift over the marsh. You pause, balancing your basket, and notice the sheer abundance of life here. The marshes weren't just perfume pantries, they were also Egypt's breadbasket. Papyrus provided writing surfaces, reeds became mats and sandals, and the fish darting in the shallows made easy meals for those who knew how to snatch them. Yet, for the perfumer, the marsh was a treasure chest of scent. As you stand there, a dragonfly lands briefly on your hand before darting off. The sun climbs higher, and the mist thins, revealing the shimmering water stretching as far as you can see. It feels timeless, exactly the kind of landscape where a perfumer from 1500 BCE might have stood, gathering the very same plants you touch now. You take a deep breath, the air heavy with damp greenery and distant lotus, and you think, all right, not bad for a giant swamp. A small joke flits into your head. Imagine explaining to an ancient Egyptian that thousands of years later, people would pay ridiculous amounts of money for perfumes with names like Marsh Essence Number 5. They'd probably just shrug and say, "We've been bottling swamp chic since the reign of Hatshepsut." Yet, this is where it begins. Every jar of perfumed oil, every offering burned in a temple, every aristocrat's wig dabbed with scented resin, it all starts with someone like you, standing knee-deep in reeds, filling a basket with the raw ingredients of scent. And as the morning grows warmer, you can almost hear the marsh whispering its promise. From mud and water will rise something divine. You balance the woven basket against your hip, reeds scratching your arms as you push deeper into the marsh. The Nile's fingers spread wide here, forming channels and pools that glimmer with light. This is where you begin the patient task of gathering the green reeds, herbs, and flowers that will, with time, grinding, and a bit of magic, or at least patience, turn into perfumes. The morning is warm now, sun rising higher, and you feel sweat bead across your forehead. Still, you carry on, because without plants, the perfumer's art is nothing more than a jar of oil and good intentions. You reach down and pull free a stalk of calamus, a reed prized for its sweet roots. Break it open, and the scent hits you instantly, sharp, spicy, almost gingery. The Egyptians knew that roots like this could be dried, ground, and blended into ointments. The funny part? You're essentially harvesting something that would later become a staple in European herbal medicine centuries down the road. History repeats itself, even in fragrance. As you gather, you notice patches of blue and white lotus floating lazily on the water's surface. Their fragrance is subtle but hypnotic, a mix of sweetness and musk. The lotus wasn't just perfume fodder, it symbolized rebirth, appearing in art as a flower rising out of the primordial swamp. Egyptians loved it so much they even carved it into columns. You pluck one bloom carefully, droplets of water sliding down your fingers, and imagine how its oils will one day mingle with sticky resins to create something worthy of a queen's wig. One quirky tidbit to amuse yourself while you're out here. Some scholars believe marsh plants were occasionally bundled together and left to steep in jars of oil under the sun. Essentially, the first attempt at a solar infusion. Picture a row of clay jars lined up like tanning tourists, soaking in the sunshine and slowly becoming perfume. Historians still argue whether this method was standard practice or just one of many experiments lost to time. But it's a strangely soothing image. Ancient oils, sunbathing by the Nile. You shift toward the papyrus groves, the stalks towering above you like natural walls. Papyrus doesn't exactly scream perfume, but its pith could be chewed for a faint sweetness, and perhaps its fibers lent subtle notes when soaked. The Egyptians were practical. If something could be mashed, boiled, or burned, they probably tried it at least once. You snap a few stems, the white pith glistening inside, and add them to the bundle. Even if it smells faintly swampy now, maybe once blended with frankincense, it could surprise you. Around your ankles, The mud squelches unpleasantly, a reminder that perfume making wasn't glamorous at its roots. Imagine telling a perfumer's apprentice, "One day, your job will involve trudging knee-deep in swamp muck to pick weeds that smell slightly better than other weeds." They'd probably laugh, then keep trudging, because this was how status and luxury were crafted. The gods demanded fragrance, the living desired it, and the dead required it. So yes, swamp duty was just part of the gig. You pause to rest, leaning against a reed stalk, and notice a bird flapping overhead. An ibis, its long beak dipping into the water in search of food. The ibis was sacred to Thoth, the god of wisdom, and you think maybe there's something fitting about its presence here, as though even the gods approve of your marsh scavenging. You wipe your forehead and glance down at your basket, now half full of reeds, blossoms, and roots. The mixture smells faintly sweet, faintly earthy, and mostly like river mud. Don't worry, it'll get better. There's also the matter of variety. Egyptians didn't rely on just one plant, they layered fragrances. Myrrh and frankincense were imported, true, but local herbs like mint, marjoram, and fenugreek also found their way into blends. Some of these you might stumble upon here in wild patches, their leaves releasing a punchy aroma when crushed. One moment you're smelling damp mud, the next a sharp hit of mint fills your nose, cutting through the heaviness. You imagine an ancient perfumer instructing you, pick balance. Too much lotus, and it's cloying. Too much reed, and it's swamp in a jar. Mix them well, and the gods themselves will lean closer to sniff. A bit dramatic, perhaps, but then again, Egyptians were nothing if not dramatic in their rituals. By midday, the heat grows heavier, pressing down on your shoulders. Insects buzz around your ears, some particularly determined to make you their lunch. You slap half-heartedly at them, joking to yourself that maybe the first true Egyptian perfume was just anything that keeps the mosquitoes away. Honestly, that might have been more valuable than luxury scents. Your basket is nearly full now, the stem sticking out in a wild tangle. You balance it carefully, knowing that the next stage will involve carrying this fragrant armful out of the marsh and toward the tools that will transform plants into oil, paste, and incense. For now, though, you take one last breath of the marsh air. It smells messy, part mud, part lotus, part sweat. But it's the raw essence of something timeless, and as you trudge toward higher ground, you realize that the magic of Egyptian perfume didn't begin in temples or palaces. It began right here, in the swampy heart of the Nile. Your basket, now overflowing with reeds and lotus blossoms, sways against your hip as you slog toward firmer ground. The mud grips your sandals, making each step a soft tug-of-war with the earth. You hear a splash behind you, louder than the gentle plunk of fish. You freeze, turning your head slowly, and there it is, a set of ripples widening across the marsh, followed by the faint, unmistakable hump of something lurking just below the surface. Yes, welcome to crocodile country. It's a peculiar reminder that Egypt's perfume story was never just about flowers and oils. It was about survival in a landscape that mixed beauty with danger. Nile crocodiles could grow to lengths of 16 feet or more, and while historians argue whether they were truly as fearsome to locals as later travelers claimed, you certainly don't feel like debating right now. You edge carefully along the reed bank, lifting your basket higher, pretending you don't notice the little set of eyes staring back at you. The Egyptians respected crocodiles enough to dedicate entire cults to Sobek, the crocodile god of strength and fertility. Oddly enough, In some temples, priests kept live crocodiles adorned with jewelry, bracelets on their limbs, even golden studs. You think about that as you shuffle along the mud. Imagine the poor priest whose job was bracelet fitter for a cranky reptile. It's not the safest gig in history. Back to your reality. You skirt the shallows, hugging the reeds, heart thudding a little faster than you'd like. The morning tranquility of the marsh suddenly feels heavier, as though every ripple might be another crocodile deciding whether you look more like a snack than a perfumer. Here's a quirky tidbit to distract yourself. Some ancient recipes for ointments included crocodile fat. Not common and not exactly Chanel-worthy, but a reminder that Egyptians experimented with just about everything. Historians still argue whether crocodile fat was genuinely useful in fragrance or just one of those let's throw it in and see ingredients. You can almost hear a perfumer shrugging, well, it's greasy, it blends, it burns with a smell. Good enough. You adjust the basket again, reeds poking your arm, and step onto slightly drier ground. Relief washes over you as you put a bit more distance between yourself and the water. The sun catches on the lotus petals in your basket, their soft blues glowing against the brown stalks of reeds. For a moment, it feels worth the near run-in with reptilian jaws. In the distance, you spot a small papyrus skiff tied to a stake, its bow bobbing gently. This is your ride out of the marsh. You trudge toward it, chuckling under your breath. Congratulations, you tell yourself. You survived the crocodile portion of the perfume industry. Not everyone can say that about their workday. You lower the basket carefully into the boat and sit on the edge, catching your breath. The ibis you saw earlier circles above again, as though keeping watch. Maybe Thoth is rewarding you for not panicking too loudly back there. You dip your hands into the water, rinsing off mud and sweat. The coolness soothes your skin, though part of you still expects another crocodile snout to surface nearby. One mainstream fact to keep in mind: the Nile wasn't just a perfume pantry, it was the lifeblood of Egypt. Its floods deposited rich silt for farming, its waters fed villages, and its marshes provided everything from fish to writing material. Perfume was just one of many treasures plucked from its abundance. Without the Nile, there would be no Egypt as we know it, and certainly no perfumed oils to dab onto wigs. Still, you can't help but marvel at the risk involved in something that seems so delicate. Modern perfumery begins in sterile labs. Egyptian perfumery began with someone like you squinting into the marsh and hoping the local wildlife wasn't too hungry. Imagine trying to explain that to someone drifting off to sleep right now. To make this soothing perfume, first risk death by crocodile. Relaxing, isn't it? With a gentle push, you set the skiff drifting into the channel. The marsh opens wider here, water reflecting the midday sun in 1,000 ripples. The air smells heavy with wet vegetation, but there's a promise of transformation in your basket. These swampy reeds will become oils, ointments, incense, scents strong enough to mask the sweat of desert heat and pleasing enough to offer to the gods. As the current nudges you forward, you rest your elbows on the rim of the boat, letting your fingers trail through the water. A dragonfly zips past your ear. The crocodile hasn't followed, at least you hope not. You take one last glance back at the reeds swaying in the breeze, the secret garden of perfume making, and feel a mix of relief and pride. The most dangerous part of gathering is over. For now, anyway. The skiff rocks gently as you settle into the woven papyrus seat, basket of fragrant greens and flowers balanced at your feet. The Nile current does most of the work, carrying you out of the marsh channels and into the smoother flow of the river. A warm breeze skims over the water, bringing with it the mixed smells of wet mud, drying reeds, and faint resin from jars stowed near the bow. Yes, you're not just transporting plants. You've also got clay jars sealed with mud, each holding resins gathered from markets or temples, frankincense from Punt, myrrh from distant coasts, and sticky pine-like sap from trees nearer home. Imagine these jars clinking softly against the side of the boat, like bottles of fine wine being ferried for a feast. Only here the feast is for the nose and maybe the gods. You stretch your legs along the side, fingers trailing in the water. A fisherman in a passing boat waves lazily, his catch flopping in a woven basket. You nod back, thinking about how odd it must look. Him hauling dinner, you hauling swamp weeds, destined to become luxury ointments. Different hustles, same river. As the boat drifts, you untie one jar and pry at the seal. The lid cracks open, releasing a cloud of aroma so sharp it almost makes your eyes water. That's frankincense, resin that, when burned, gives off a citrusy, piney smoke. Egyptians loved it, not just for the smell, but because they believed it pleased the gods. Quirky detail here. Some scholars note frankincense was so precious it could be used as currency, a kind of fragrant paycheck. Historians still argue whether Egypt truly controlled steady trade routes for it, or if supplies were irregular, making it all the more prized. Either way, having a jar of it at your feet makes you feel slightly richer. You reseal the jar, setting it carefully back beside the lotus blossoms. Imagine the combinations ahead. Lotus steeped in oil, frankincense ground into powder, calamus root boiled into paste. You're essentially transporting the building blocks of an ancient chemistry set. And yet, sitting in the boat, it doesn't feel like chemistry. It feels like carrying secrets. The banks of the Nile glide by, dotted with palms and mud brick houses. Children splash in the shallows, shouting as they chase each other, while a few women squat by the water, rinsing linens and slapping them rhythmically against stones. You smile at the everyday scene. Somewhere in those houses, someone might be waiting for a small jar of the very oils you're about to help prepare. Perfume wasn't just for pharaohs and priests. Even middle-class Egyptians sometimes dabbed scented oils on their collars or burned them in their homes. A joke pops into your mind. Imagine the world's first influencer perfumer, sitting in a reed chair, telling apprentices, "Smash that lotus button, subscribe for more scents." Maybe that's not too far off. Perfume recipes were indeed closely guarded, passed down through families or temple guilds. To share one outside the circle was almost like leaking state secrets. The boat hits a small swell, water sloshing over the side, and you quickly grab the basket before it tips. The plants are safe, though a few reeds stick out at awkward angles. You sigh and shift them, inhaling the faint sweetness of the lotus again. That's the perfume industry for you. Half glamour, half logistics nightmare. Another mainstream fact for you. Perfume in Egypt wasn't just worn. It was consumed in rituals. Oils might be smeared on statues of gods, burned as incense during ceremonies, or even used in medicine. One papyrus describes mixing fragrant resins with honey to treat throat ailments. Try picturing that as you float downstream, an ancient lozenge with a taste of incense and syrup. Tasty? Probably not. Memorable? Absolutely. As the sun tilts westward, the city outlines come into view. Clustered mud brick houses, taller temple pylons rising behind them, the occasional glint of white limestone from a shrine wall. You steer the skiff toward the landing, eager to step onto dry ground again. The jars rattle softly as the boat bumps the shore. You gather the basket and jars into your arms, adjusting your grip so you don't drop anything. The scents mix together: muddy lotus, sharp frankincense, sticky resin. It's not perfume yet, but it's a preview, a symphony of rough notes waiting for order. You chuckle as you haul the bundle onto your shoulder. Here you are, sweaty, muddy, carrying swamp weeds and sticky jars into town. Not glamorous, not elegant, but this is where luxury starts, with someone willing to haul heavy baskets down the Nile while pretending crocodiles aren't eyeing them like hors d'oeuvres. The sun glows orange on the horizon as you step onto the landing, city noise humming faintly in the distance. The perfumer's workshop awaits, and with it, the next transformation. For now, though, you stand for a moment on the dock, watching the river drift away behind you. Perfume may be for the temples and the rich, but its roots are always here, floating quietly on the Nile. The first thing you notice as you step into the city proper is the sound. A dull hum of voices, sandals scuffing against hard-packed earth, the sharp cry of a vendor who is absolutely certain his onions are superior to anyone else's. You weave into the bustle, your arms loaded with reeds and jars, and suddenly the scent of the marsh is replaced by a different cocktail: cooked fish, dust, animals, and the unmistakable tang of spices drifting from the market. This is the perfume maker's real hunting ground, not just the marshes, but the marketplace. Here, tucked between stalls of lentils, baskets of figs, and jars of honey, you find merchants selling the world in miniature: powders in little cones, oils sealed with clay, resins wrapped in cloth. It's less Sephora, more open-air chaos, but the principle is the same. Scents everywhere, each with a price tag. You pause near a stall where an old man sits behind jars of resin. He waves a hand lazily, inviting you closer. You lean down and catch a whiff: sharp, smoky myrrh. It's sticky, clumping together in irregular nuggets. You know this resin well. Egyptians valued it not only for perfumes, but also for embalming. A bit morbid, perhaps, but that's the dual life of scent here. It makes the living attractive and keeps the dead from smelling too, well, dead. One quirky tidbit: myrrh was so prized that Egyptian expeditions were launched just to secure it from Punt, a trading land likely located in modern Somalia or Eritrea. Some reliefs even show Queen Hatshepsut's temple decorated with images of myrrh trees being transported back in baskets. Historians still argue whether those trees ever truly survived in Egyptian soil, or if it was just a bit of royal propaganda. Either way, the demand for myrrh was relentless. Moving on, you wander past another stall where a woman is selling little packets of powder. You pinch one open and sniff: fenugreek. It smells nutty, a bit bitter, and slightly sweet all at once. Egyptians may have used it in both cooking and fragrance, blurring the line between kitchen spice and perfumer's ingredient. In fact, you half joke to yourself that half the perfumes of the ancient world must have started with someone accidentally spilling dinner spices into oil and thinking, not bad. The market is also where you notice how cosmopolitan Egypt really was. Cinnamon from the Far East, cardamom from India, frankincense and myrrh from Punt, cedar oil from Lebanon. This isn't just a local scene. It's an ancient version of globalization, all funneled through noisy stalls under the desert sun. Imagine trying to haggle for cinnamon sticks when you've never even seen the land they come from. Trust me, it's good, the the merchant says, and you're left hoping he isn't just selling twigs dipped in honey. Here's a mainstream fact worth noting. Egyptian markets weren't only about buying and selling, they were places of gossip, politics, and social life. Priests might come down to buy incense for rituals. Nobles might send servants to purchase scented oils, and ordinary folks browsed for cheaper blends to mask the less glamorous realities of daily life in a hot climate. You shift your basket again, feeling the weight of your Marsh harvest. The contrast between your fresh lotus blossoms and the resin-packed stalls is striking, like walking into a bakery with a sack of flour while everyone else is selling cakes. You know the blossoms will wilt quickly, which is why the perfumer's workshop has to work fast. The resins and oils from the market are the steady base notes. The delicate marsh flowers are fleeting top notes that need capturing before they fade. A joke slips into your mind. If perfumes are like people, resins are the dependable relatives who always show up, while lotus blossoms are the flaky cousins. Beautiful, intoxicating, but gone before the party's even over. As you continue through the crowd, you catch sight of a small shrine at the market's edge. Smoke curls upward from an incense burner, filling the air with a heady mixture of frankincense and cedar. People pause to bow their heads or leave offerings, the mingled scent cutting through the dust and sweat of the day. It's a reminder that perfume here isn't just luxury. It's spiritual currency, a way of speaking to the divine without words. Finally, you emerge from the press of stalls, basket heavier now with a few extra jars of resin you couldn't resist. The sun dips slightly lower, casting long shadows between the mud brick walls. Ahead lies the perfumer's shaded workshop, where all this chaotic mix of reeds, blossoms, oils, and resins will begin to transform. You pause once more to glance back at the market, the noise, the smells, the constant press of people. It's overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. It means life, trade, connection, and without it, no perfumer could ever hope to blend swampy lotus with resin from halfway across the world. You duck under a low lintel and step into the perfumer's shaded workshop, instantly grateful for the cool relief from the blazing sun. The air inside is thick, so thick you can practically chew it, with the mingled scents of oils, resins, and blossoms. It's like stepping into a cloud of incense that never drifts away, only settles deeper into the mud brick walls. The room is cluttered in the best possible way. Clay jars of all sizes are stacked along the walls, some sealed with wax, others left open, their contents glistening darkly in the dim light. A set of polished stone mortars sits on one low bench, pestles worn smooth from years of grinding. Over another bench, bundles of herbs dangle upside down, drying slowly in the shade. This is not a neat apothecary, it's more like a kitchen mid-feast, every surface sticky or fragrant or both. You set your basket down, and the perfumer himself, let's imagine a wiry man with deep lines around his eyes and a permanent sheen of oil on his hands, gives you a nod. He doesn't rush to greet you. In this place, the plants and resins command more attention than people. He gestures at your load of lotus and reeds, murmuring something about good harvest before shuffling over to inspect the jars you've brought. He cracks open one, dips his finger, and lifts it to his nose. Myrrh. A smile creeps across his face, the kind of smile only resin can buy. For all the solemnity of their temples, Egyptians were still human, and nothing makes a perfumer's day quite like fresh resin sticking to his skin. One mainstream fact: Egyptian workshops like this were not purely private businesses. Some perfumers were tied directly to temples, producing sacred incense and oils. Others served noble households. The line between religion, medicine, and luxury was blurry. Your jar of ointment could heal, seduce, or sanctify, depending on who bought it. The perfumer takes a pestle and, with practiced rhythm, begins crushing a pinch of dried marjoram leaves. The sound is steady, almost hypnotic. Thump, grind, thump, grind. You watch the green powder rise like a faint mist, mingling with the sticky sweetness of lotus already wilting in your basket. He mutters, half to himself, about balance. Too much resin, and it chokes. Too much blossom, and it fades. You're starting to think this man has spent too long negotiating with plants. Quirky tidbit for you. There's evidence that some perfumes were made in enormous batches, cooked in large cauldrons, while others were tiny and experimental. A bit like modern cooking, bulk soup for the family versus one delicate dish at a fancy restaurant. Historians still argue whether the recipes we've recovered represent everyday practice or ceremonial best of the best blends. Either way, the principle is the same. You start with a workshop like this, sweating over clay pots. The perfumer waves you over to a row of tiny cups filled with oils, castor oil, moringa oil, maybe sesame. He dips a fingertip into one and smears it onto your wrist. It feels slick, sticky, and smells faintly nutty. Oil is the canvas here. Flowers and resins are just the paint. Without oil, everything else slips away too quickly. Egyptians didn't have alcohol-based sprays like modern perfumes. What they had were these dense, lingering oils that clung to linen, skin, and hair. You think, not without humor, about how every Egyptian noble basically walked around glistening like a marinated olive. If you ever doubted the power of oil to make you smell interesting, this workshop erases the doubt. The perfumer points to the corner where a small fire crackles beneath a clay pot. The air above it shimmers faintly with heat. That's where the magic will happen. Resins melting, oils absorbing, blossoms steeping. But before that comes the grinding, the filtering, the patient preparation. You're struck by how much of this luxury work is actually tedious labor. Hours spent pounding petals, straining mush, scraping resin from stone. It's glamorous only in the final jar. A small joke bubbles up. Somewhere, a noblewoman is probably complaining that her ointment isn't fragrant enough, while the perfumer is wiping sweat off his brow and muttering, "Lady, do you have any idea how many crocodiles tried to eat your perfume this morning?" You linger in the workshop, taking in its atmosphere. It's equal parts laboratory and temple, filled with scents that seem to cling not just to surfaces, but to your skin, your hair, your very breath. This is where the swamp turns sacred, where reeds and resins learn to speak in the language of perfume. And as you lean against a bench, listening to the steady grind of pestle on stone, you realize you've crossed a threshold. No longer just gathering raw plants, you are part of the alchemy that transforms them. The mortar feels unexpectedly heavy under your palms as you begin grinding the petals by hand, your movements slow and deliberate. You press down on the fragrant lotus, calamus, and marjoram, releasing their oils drop by drop, scent by scent. Each stroke of the pestle is rhythmic, almost meditative. Thump, twist, grind, echoing faintly against the sun-warmed mud brick walls. You think about how this repetitive motion must have lulled ancient perfumers into a trance, blending focus with the gentle hypnosis of fragrance. One mainstream fact: manual grinding was essential because heat-sensitive petals could lose their subtle aromas if crushed too aggressively or heated prematurely. The Egyptians didn't have electric blenders, so all fragrance extraction relied on patience and elbow grease. In a way, every wrist ache earned its reward in scent. A quirky tidbit: some perfumers supposedly whispered little prayers to the flowers while grinding, asking for their essence to cooperate. Historians still argue whether this was literal superstition or metaphorical storytelling to impress apprentices. Either way, it paints a charming picture, a workshop filled with the faint aroma of petals and soft murmurings of encouragement. You can't help but smile at the mental image, petals performing magic because someone said, "Please." Your arms ache pleasantly after the first batch, but you keep going, crushing the fragrant plants until they are a mushy, glistening paste. The air becomes intoxicating. The sharp green bite of calamus intertwines with the delicate sweetness of lotus. The contrast is oddly grounding, like standing on a marshy riverbank while smelling the first blossoms of spring. As you work, your eyes wander to a small pile of dried herbs at the corner of the bench. Mint leaves, tiny marjoram buds, even a few crushed fennel seeds. Egyptians valued layering scents. A perfume was rarely one note. Each plant you grind contributes its own nuance, creating a complex bouquet. A little extra lotus, a touch of spicy root, a whisper of bitter herb. It's an orchestra of smell, conducted by your hands. You pause to inhale deeply, letting the mixture's potency settle. One joke comes to mind. This is basically ancient aromatherapy, except instead of a calming spa soundtrack, you're surrounded by occasional hisses of crocodiles and the shouts of market vendors, still relaxing if you squint hard enough. The sticky paste begins to cling to your fingers, almost refusing to leave. You scrape it carefully from the mortar, transferring it into a small bowl. Each lump feels like a small triumph, the first tangible result of your labor. You can imagine how proud a perfumer must have felt, finally holding the essence of the marsh in their hands, knowing it will soon evolve into something luxurious and enduring. Another fact: Egyptian perfumes weren't always liquid. Many were thick pastes or unguents, designed to be applied to skin or hair, rubbed into the hands, or dabbed onto linen. The viscosity helped the fragrance linger longer, a practical solution for surviving the desert's heat. Some of these pastes even doubled as medicinal balms, so your grinding isn't just about scent, it's about health, ritual, and status. You stop to rest, brushing sweat from your brow and inhaling the lingering aroma. The rhythm of the workshop hums around you, other mortars thumping softly, the subtle hiss of heated oils, the occasional cough from dust or incense. Your hands smell faintly of lotus and calamus, a reminder that scent is as much skin-deep as it is airborne. A final quirky note: some experimental batches were mixed with honey, sesame oil, or even animal fats, not because the Egyptians lacked taste, but because these ingredients help preserve and carry the fragrance. You dab a bit on your fingertip, and yes, it's sticky, slightly sweet, and distinctly swampy, but also the raw material of elegance. Grinding, scraping, and mixing continues, your senses lulled by the repetition. Sweat drips from your temples. The day outside grows warmer, but inside, in this fragrant cocoon, you feel time stretch. Hours could pass, and you wouldn't notice. And in a way, that's exactly how the Egyptians wanted it. The art of perfume required patience, care, and a willingness to let nature reveal its secrets slowly. The next task demands patience and a delicate touch, filtering the fragrant waters. You take the mushy paste of petals, reeds and crushed herbs, and pour it carefully into a fine cloth, suspending it over a clay bowl. Tiny drips of liquid, tinged with color and heavy with scent, begin to gather. The smell is immediate and enveloping, a soft, heady combination of green calamus, sweet lotus, and the faint earthiness of reeds. You lean close, inhaling deeply, and for a moment the chaos of mud, market, and workshop fades into a kind of fragrant meditation. One mainstream fact: this step, known as maceration or infusion, was vital to extract essential oils without losing volatile scents. Egyptians had discovered that soaking petals in water or oil over long periods allowed the fragrance to migrate from plant material into a usable medium. Essentially, you're coaxing scent out slowly, like encouraging shy guests to come to a party. Quirky tidbit: some recipes suggest leaving the infusion jars outside overnight so the dew and moonlight could enhance the aroma. Historians still argue whether this was purely symbolic or if subtle chemical changes actually occurred. Either way, it's a charmingly mystical addition to what is, fundamentally, chemistry in action. You can almost imagine jars lined along the riverbank, catching silver beams of moonlight, while reeds murmur softly in the breeze. As the liquid drips, you notice the subtle layering that begins to form. The first few drops smell mostly green and fresh, dominated by calamus. Later, heavier, sweeter notes emerge as lotus and marjoram infuse. This is the magic of patience. The early drips are fleeting and light, the later ones richer and deeper. You scrape a bit of paste from the cloth, watching the stubborn fibers release their remaining oil slowly, a reminder that no part of the plant is wasted. Your fingers are sticky now, and the scent clings to your skin. A small joke drifts into your mind. You're basically wearing swamp perfume, and yet it's considered divine in the right hands. You dab a bit on your wrist, testing how the scent interacts with your warmth. It's clinging, lingering, proof that the Egyptians knew how to make smell last longer than a passing breeze. The room feels even warmer now, clay walls holding the sun's residual heat. Tiny insects buzz lazily, unbothered by the human activity around them. You glance at the perfumer, who is fussing over a similar batch, shaking it gently and murmuring instructions to the apprentices. "Patience, patience," he says, as though the plants might respond faster if coaxed with kind words. Fact: filtering wasn't just about clarity. It also helped remove unwanted plant matter that could spoil the fragrance or alter its texture. The Egyptians valued both smell and feel. A gritty, fibrous perfume paste was considered poor craftsmanship. Every careful strain of liquid was a step toward refinement. You tilt the cloth, allowing the final drops to escape. The resulting liquid shimmers faintly, almost metallic in its richness, and carries a faint sweetness balanced by earthy undertones. You inhale, imagining a noblewoman applying it to her collar or priests anointing a statue. It's transformative, a swampy beginning turned almost heavenly in a few careful hours. A final thought: the slow drip mirrors the rhythm of the Nile itself. Life, scent, and labor flow steadily, insistently, quietly. You pause to watch the amber-tinted liquid collect, thinking about how such a simple process could yield a product treasured for centuries. There's a beauty here in simplicity, patience, and the unspoken dialogue between human and plant. Next comes the gentle heat, the stage where oils and pastes are coaxed into full-bodied fragrance. You stand over the clay pots, hands hovering just above the rim as warm air rises. The perfumer sets a slow fire beneath, letting it lick the base of the vessel without ever roaring. The goal is subtlety. Too much heat, and the delicate oils evaporate. Too little, and the sticky resins refuse to blend. You lean closer, inhaling the first wafts of aroma, which curl upward in gentle waves. Mainstream fact: Egyptians often used low, sustained heat to encourage the melding of oils and resins. This technique allowed them to extract more fragrance from tough plant matter without burning the essence. It's basic chemistry with patience as the secret ingredient. Quirky tidbit: some workshops supposedly employed tiny fans or reeds to waft heat evenly, as if encouraging the fragrance to mingle politely. Historians still argue whether such implements were widespread or anecdotal, but the image of an apprentice gently fanning a pot of sticky paste is oddly soothing. You imagine standing there with a little palm frond, puffing air over simmering lotus. The air grows heavier, saturated with the layered aromas of lotus, calamus, myrrh, and whatever extra herbs your workshop had added. It's mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. You can feel it settling on your skin, clinging to hair and clothes, a reminder that in Egypt, perfume wasn't fleeting, it lingered. Even now you sniff your sleeve and catch a trace of swamp lotus. A small joke occurs to you. Warning: prolonged exposure may lead to spontaneous elegance or minor delusions of godhood. Perhaps both are true. Perfume had a way of elevating its wearer, at least psychologically. You stir the mixture gently, watching it thicken slightly, shifting from opaque paste to a more uniform consistency. The resins are melting, combining with oil to form a cohesive whole, the lotus scent slowly dominating but tempered by green, spicy notes. It's a slow transformation, almost ceremonial. Fact: heating oils with resins wasn't purely for fragrance. It also improved preservation, allowing scents to last longer in the desert heat. An Egyptian perfumer wasn't just crafting beauty, they were engineering longevity. Each batch had to endure not only the wearer's skin, but also the rigors of travel, trade, and climate. You tilt the pot slightly, peering at the texture. Smooth, slightly viscous, still a little sticky. The smell is intoxicating yet comforting, earthy and floral at once. It reminds you of the marsh, the market, and now the intimate warmth of the workshop. A full sensory circle. Another quirky note: some historical accounts suggest perfumers would taste tiny amounts of their creations, checking sweetness or bitterness, which is both amusing and slightly alarming. Imagine licking a sticky resin paste, thinking, "Yes, this will smell divine later." Historians still debate whether this was routine or simply ceremonial. You stir once more and lift the pot, letting the fragrance rise like steam from the Nile itself. This is alchemy in its most literal sense. Raw swamp plants transform through patient grinding, careful filtering, and gentle heat into a substance that could delight gods, nobles, and even ordinary citizens. You inhale deeply and think, this is why people paid fortunes for a few drops of oil. Time passes in slow, golden waves. Outside, sunlight filters through the lattice, casting patterned shadows on the floor. Inside, the mixture simmers quietly, thickening and clarifying. You sit back, letting the gentle heat and enveloping scent lull your senses. This is the essence of Egyptian perfume making: rhythm, patience, and an almost meditative engagement with nature itself. Now comes the blending, the delicate balancing act that separates a good perfume from a great one. You scoop a small portion of the warmed paste into a shallow bowl, swirling it slowly with your fingers. The oils coat your skin, the lotus and calamus aromas intertwining with myrrh and hints of marjoram. Each scent is distinct yet harmonious, like instruments in a miniature orchestra. You tilt the bowl, observing how the liquids and semi-solids move together, merging into a single, fragrant whole. Mainstream fact: Egyptians were meticulous about ratios. A little too much of one resin, and the perfume could overwhelm; too little, and the fragrance might fade quickly. Balancing scents required not only experience, but a keen nose. Apprentices often spent years learning subtle differences in smell before they were entrusted with a batch. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers reportedly tested their blends by dabbing oils on small strips of linen and leaving them to age for a day or two before deciding if the mixture was correct. Historians still argue whether these tests were purely practical or part of ritualistic preparation, but the thought of drying scented linen in a workshop full of curious apprentices is endearingly quaint. You imagine small strips fluttering over benches, carrying marsh and market fragrances like miniature flags. You inhale deeply and notice the complexity. Lotus remains dominant, yet it is tempered by the earthiness of calamus, the sharp warmth of marjoram, and the sticky richness of myrrh. It's as if you've captured a tiny slice of the Nile, from marsh to market to temple, in a single bowl. The scent evokes water, sun-warmed reeds, distant spices, and the quiet intimacy of a workshop. A joke drifts into your thoughts. If modern perfumers complain about difficult clients, they've never dealt with a lotus that refuses to mingle politely with calamus. You smile at the mental image of stubborn petals in protest. Fact: blending often involved layering notes in a specific order: top, middle, and base. The lotus and herbs form the top, giving immediate scent upon application. Resins and oils form the base, providing longevity and depth. The Egyptians understood that perfume is temporal. What hits first charms the nose. What lingers leaves a lasting impression. You swirl again, feeling the sticky texture shift under your fingers, and notice how each movement subtly changes the aroma. A new fragrance note emerges as more oils absorb the resins, a touch sharper or sweeter depending on the exact combination. This is the essence of craftsmanship: patience, intuition, and the willingness to make minute adjustments for hours on end. Quirky note: some sources suggest perfumers occasionally added tiny amounts of honey or animal fat to modify consistency or scent. Not exactly what you'd call elegant by today's standards, but functional, and in some cases, even ritualistic. Historians still debate whether these additives were widespread or experimental. The room feels warmer now, almost as if the air itself is infused with perfume. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the scents wash over you, imagining noble hands applying these oils for temple ceremonies, personal grooming, or ritual anointing. Each swirl, each breath, connects the mundane labor of grinding and filtering with a transcendent sensory experience. As the blending continues, you realize that every bowl, every jar, and every drop is a miniature story, a journey from swamp reeds and lotus blossoms across markets and temples into the human desire for beauty and ritual. It's laborious, precise, and quietly magical. And here you are, part of it, fingertips fragrant, senses tuned, fully immersed in the ancient art of Egyptian perfume making. With your blended oils and resins resting in shallow bowls, the next step is storage, but not just any storage. Clay jars await, their interiors clean and cool, sealed with wax or mud to preserve the precious fragrance. You lift one, feeling the weight and texture in your hands, imagining the journey ahead, from the workshop to temple rituals, noble households, or perhaps even distant lands via trade caravans. Every jar is a promise, a small container of marshes, markets, and meticulous labor, waiting to unfold its aroma in someone else's world. Mainstream fact: Egyptians understood that the storage method affected fragrance longevity. Clay jars kept oils from exposure to air and light, both of which could alter or diminish scent. Some jars were double sealed or lined with resin to prevent leakage and spoilage, showing impressive foresight in preservation. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers reportedly placed charms, tiny figurines, or even small written prayers inside jars before sealing them. Historians still debate whether this was purely symbolic or meant to protect the scent. You smile imagining a miniature lotus charm nestled among the oils, blessing them for the long road ahead. You carefully pour a portion of your blended paste into the first jar. It sticks slightly, viscous and shiny under the light, a tactile reminder of the labor invested. You seal it with wax, pressing down gently, and the smell rises faintly from the rim, a preview of what will unfold once the seal is broken by someone's fingertips centuries later. The next jar is filled with slightly more lotus-heavy paste, meant for temple use. The perfumer murmurs instructions as you work, his hands deft and practiced, like a conductor guiding an orchestra of scents. You imagine the temple rituals, priests anointing statues, incense burning, oils dabbed onto offerings. Perfume in Egypt is never purely decorative. It is functional, spiritual, and symbolic. A small joke crosses your mind. Handle with care. Contains the essence of a marsh and a market, plus a hint of divine approval. Yes, it sounds ridiculous, but it's accurate. These jars carry far more than fragrance. They carry culture, history, and ritual. Fact: perfume jars were sometimes labeled with hieroglyphs indicating their contents or intended use. One could tell at a glance whether the contents were for personal adornment, medicinal application, or temple rituals. This system helped maintain consistency and prevented accidental misuse, a surprisingly sophisticated method for an ancient civilization. You move on to the next jar, double-checking that the blend of oils and resins is uniform. A stray reed fiber is quickly removed, the surface smoothed with a gentle swipe of your finger. Each jar must be perfect. Imperfections could mean uneven scent or faster spoilage. The Egyptians valued both functionality and aesthetics. Quirky note: some perfumers reportedly tasted the oils to ensure balance, tiny licks to check sweetness or bitterness. While you haven't tried it yet, you can see the rationale. Scent and flavor share chemical components, and a balance that smells harmonious often also tastes subtly pleasing. Historians still debate how common this practice was. Once all jars are sealed, you line them up on a low shelf, the scents mingling faintly in the air. Lotus, calamus, marjoram, and myrrh hover together, a gentle, intoxicating cloud that reminds you why the Egyptians revered fragrance so profoundly. You step back and inhale slowly, feeling a wave of satisfaction. The swamp, the market, and the workshop have converged here in these small vessels of history and aroma. With the jars lined up, your attention turns to labeling and inventory, a task that might sound mundane, but in ancient Egypt it was an art in itself. You take a soft reed brush and dip it in dark ink, carefully drawing hieroglyphs onto each clay lid. One indicates temple use, another personal adornment, and yet another experimental blend. The symbols are small and precise, looping gracefully across the curved surface. You marvel at the patience required. One slip and the jar might be misread, its precious contents misapplied. Mainstream fact: Egyptians were remarkably meticulous about labeling and categorizing perfume jars. Not only did it prevent misuse, but it also reflected the culture's broader emphasis on order, balance, and ritual correctness. A mislabel could have serious consequences, especially in religious contexts. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers decorated their jars with tiny motifs of animals, plants, or symbols invoking the gods. Historians still argue whether these illustrations served purely decorative purposes or acted as magical safeguards for the scent. You imagine tiny painted crocodiles or lotus blossoms peering up at you from each lid, silently approving your work. As you finish the final hieroglyph, the perfumer steps back, nodding in satisfaction. "All is ready," he says, his voice low but firm. He gestures toward a small shelf near the workshop entrance, where the jars will rest for the next phase: maturation. Oils and resins were rarely used immediately. They were left to meld, age, and develop their full character over days or weeks. You pick up one jar and feel its weight. The fragrance is subtle but promising, a whisper of marshlands and markets contained in a small vessel. You dip a finger just to smell, careful not to disturb the seal, and inhale deeply. It's remarkable how far this simple mixture of swamp lotus, calamus, marjoram, and myrrh has come, how labor, patience, and quiet expertise can transform raw nature into something almost sacred. Fact: maturation was a key step. Perfumes could improve significantly with time as volatile compounds stabilized and scents harmonized. The Egyptians seemed to understand intuitively that a well-aged blend would deliver a richer, longer-lasting fragrance. Some texts even specify waiting periods for particular oils, showing the precision involved. A small joke drifts through your mind. Imagine telling someone a perfume needs weeks to settle, and they reply, "I just wanted to smell nice yesterday." Patience was not just a virtue, it was essential. You glance around the workshop. Mortars still hold traces of crushed petals. Cloths dangle with filtered extracts, and clay pots retain faint, lingering warmth from earlier heating. The room feels alive, a quiet symphony of past and present, plant and human, mundane labor and ritual artistry. Quirky note: in some workshops, apprentices were tasked with sniff testing the air periodically, making sure the aromas blended harmoniously and that no particular scent dominated prematurely. Historians still debate whether this was formal instruction or casual oversight, but the image of young assistants wandering the workshop sniffing the air is amusing and oddly charming. You pause, letting the scents wash over you, and take a slow breath. The jars, neatly labeled and sealed, stand ready. The swamp and market have been transformed into vessels of fragrance, carrying with them not just smell, but stories, rituals, and centuries of human ingenuity. The next step draws you into the subtler art of scent pairing. You kneel before the jars, lifting lids carefully and wafting the fragrances together in small bowls to test compatibility. The lotus is soft and watery, calamus sharp and grassy, marjoram herbal and green, myrrh sticky and resinous. Mixing them in varying proportions is like composing music. One note too loud and the melody falters, too soft and it disappears entirely. You swirl gently, inhaling, adjusting ratios, coaxing harmony from what was once raw marsh matter. Mainstream fact: Egyptians understood the concept of top, middle, and base notes long before modern perfumery. Top notes, usually lighter floral or herbal scents, were noticed immediately upon application. Middle and base notes, resins and oils, provided depth and longevity, creating a balanced fragrance experience. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers reportedly created small test strips of papyrus or linen to dab the blends, leaving them in the sun or near incense smoke to see how they developed. Historians still argue whether this was scientific experimentation or ritualistic observation, but the image of scented strips fluttering like tiny flags in the workshop is endearingly quaint. You adjust one blend, adding a touch more calamus to balance the sweetness of lotus. It smells promising, earthy, yet elegant. You dip a fingertip in the mixture and gently rub it on the back of your hand. The aroma lingers, subtle at first, then expanding to fill your senses. There's a quiet satisfaction in watching a well-considered blend come alive. Fact: Egyptians often customized blends for different purposes. Some were strictly for temple use, others for personal adornment, and a few for medicinal or ritualistic application. The ability to tailor fragrance to specific contexts demonstrates the sophistication and attention to detail of ancient perfumers. A joke drifts through your thoughts. If perfumes could argue, the lotus would probably complain about being overpowered by calamus. You grin at the mental image, tiny marsh flowers bickering over balance in a clay bowl. As you continue testing, you notice the subtle transformations over time. The oils absorb the resins, scents mellow, and the overall profile deepens. What began as separate elements now interacts symphonically, producing an aroma that is greater than the sum of its parts. The slow development of scent mirrors the rhythm of your work, encouraging mindfulness and care with every movement. Quirky note: some workshops reportedly kept tiny jars labeled for trial only, where apprentices could experiment freely, adding unconventional ingredients like honey, figs, or even wine to observe effects. Historians still debate how widespread such experimentation was, but the creative spirit is evident. You step back for a moment, inhaling the complex aroma filling the air. The workshop seems to breathe along with you, each jar contributing to a living tapestry of scent. You realize the process is as much about intuition, patience, and observation as it is about skillful mixing. Each decision, how much lotus, how long to age, when to add marjoram, affects the final product profoundly. As the sun shifts in the sky, casting patterned shadows through the lattice, you continue blending and adjusting, fully absorbed. Each movement, each sniff, each stir contributes to the legacy of fragrance stretching back through centuries. You are part of that tradition now, carrying forward the knowledge and care that makes Egyptian perfumes so remarkable, ephemeral, yet enduring. With the primary blends established, your focus shifts to creating the final textures, ointments, oils, and thicker pastes suitable for application. You scoop small portions from each bowl and begin folding them into warmed base oils, watching how the sticky, fragrant resins slowly dissolve. The lotus aroma rises first, soft and watery, followed by the green bite of calamus, the herbal undertone of marjoram, and finally the rich, resinous warmth of myrrh. Your hands glide through the mixture, sticky and fragrant, as if massaging centuries of history into a single cohesive substance. Mainstream fact: Egyptians frequently used carrier oils like sesame, castor, or moringa as the base for perfumes and ointments. These oils not only preserved the delicate scents, but also made the mixture more pliable and suitable for skin application. The choice of oil could subtly influence the overall aroma, a consideration that demonstrates their nuanced understanding of materials. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers added tiny amounts of honey or fig pulp to certain blends, believing that the natural sugars enhanced both the scent and the texture. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or limited to experimental batches, but the idea of sweetened perfume evokes a playful, almost edible approach to fragrance. As you fold and mix, you feel the gradual transformation under your fingers. What began as a disparate collection of marsh plants, resins, and herbs has become a unified tactile experience. The sticky paste is soft, rich, and almost luminous under the workshop's diffuse light. Each stir releases another wave of scent, a gentle crescendo of complexity. You pause to inhale, letting the aroma settle on your skin. A small joke drifts through your thoughts. Congratulations, you now smell like a Nile marsh with a hint of ceremonial gravitas. The humor is gentle, a light reminder that even sacred crafts had moments of levity. Fact: Egyptians often prepared multiple consistencies of perfume for different applications. Thicker pastes could be applied directly to the skin or hair, while more fluid oils were easier to spread over larger surfaces or burn as incense. This versatility highlights their practical ingenuity in addition to aesthetic sensibility. You pour a small portion into a shallow jar, smoothing the surface with a fingertip, and watch the mixture settle. The lotus aroma softens slightly, blending more seamlessly with calamus and myrrh. The pastes emit a subtle warmth, not just from residual heat, but from the intimate labor invested in each batch. Quirky note: some historical texts hint at the use of small brushes or sticks to layer scents, applying concentrated spots of fragrance to achieve subtle gradients. Historians still debate the prevalence of this technique, but imagining tiny painted aromas along wrists or collars is both charming and oddly meticulous. The workshop hums quietly around you. Mortars still hold traces of crushed petals. Jars of matured oils line the shelves, and the faint heat from earlier fires lingers. You step back for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the combined scents of marsh, market, and crafted oils envelop you. Here, in this intimate, sun-warmed space, the ephemeral has become tangible, a living perfume born of patience, intuition, and centuries of practice. With the pastes and oils settled, it's time to move into final blending for specialized scents. You arrange several small bowls, each containing slightly different ratios of lotus, calamus, marjoram, and myrrh, along with their chosen oils. The perfumer gestures for you to compare them, encouraging a subtle nose test. You lean close, inhaling each carefully, noting the way the aromas evolve. The sharp green of calamus at first whiff, followed by the sweet lotus mid-note, and finally the sticky, grounding myrrh lingering at the back. It's a complex dance of smell, and your brain relaxes into it, almost meditative. Mainstream fact: Egyptians often produced multiple variants of the same base perfume to suit different uses. Temple rituals, personal adornment, and medicinal applications each demanded slightly altered blends, reflecting an early understanding of context-dependent fragrance. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers supposedly tasted their oils, a tiny lick to judge sweetness or sharpness. Historians still debate whether this was common practice or limited to special experimental batches. Imagining sticky fingers meeting lips in pursuit of olfactory perfection is both amusing and a little startling, even in the controlled calm of the workshop. You begin merging some blends, adding a dash of extra oil here, a pinch of dried lotus there, until a single bowl releases a fragrance that seems perfectly balanced. It's richer, deeper, and more cohesive than any single ingredient alone. A gentle joke crosses your mind. You're essentially babysitting tiny marsh flowers to adulthood. It's funny, in a quiet, almost endearing way, and the thought keeps you smiling while your hands work. Fact: blending allowed perfumers to manipulate evaporation rates, scent projection, and longevity. Egyptians understood that the sequence and ratio of ingredients influenced how quickly top notes dissipated and base notes lingered, creating a controlled sensory experience. As you fold the final mixture, the texture feels soft, supple, and a little sticky, clinging to your fingers. Each stir releases a wave of aroma, like a small burst of the Nile itself. You dip a finger into the paste, lifting it slowly to your nose. The scent is layered, alive, and strangely grounding. Marsh, market, and meticulous human craft mingled perfectly. Quirky note: some workshops reportedly labeled the jars with poetic names or descriptors of the scent, like Marsh Morning or Temple Dawn. Historians still debate whether these were widely used or limited to ceremonial batches. Imagining scented jars with names more evocative than practical is charmingly human. Finally, the perfumer gestures to the collection of jars, and you begin transferring the final blends into the vessels destined for use. Each jar, weighted with history and care, carries the culmination of hours of labor and gentle coaxing of nature's offerings. You pause to inhale deeply, absorbing the rich aroma, and realize that you have participated in something centuries in the making, a small, fragrant miracle of patience, skill, and devotion. Now comes the ritual of cooling and settling. You carefully place the freshly blended jars on a low wooden shelf, away from the lingering heat of the workshop fires. The air is still thick with aroma, but the process of resting allows the oils and resins to fully marry, smoothing out any sharp edges and deepening the fragrance profile. You watch as tiny air bubbles rise and vanish, almost imperceptibly, a reminder that time is as essential as skill in the creation of perfume. Mainstream fact: Egyptians understood that scents matured over time. Even the most carefully blended oils required a period of rest to stabilize volatile compounds, ensuring that the final fragrance would last longer on skin and fabric. Some texts specify exact waiting periods, showing the precision and care invested in this art. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers reportedly whispered encouragement or prayers over their jars during settling, believing that human attention or spiritual blessing could improve the scent. Historians still debate whether this was widespread ritual or anecdotal superstition, but imagining marsh flowers and resins receiving gentle verbal coaching is endearingly quaint. You lift a jar, inhaling deeply, and notice how the fragrance seems to have softened and harmonized. The lotus has mellowed slightly, blending seamlessly with the green calamus and warm, resinous myrrh. The aroma is richer, more rounded, and begins to carry a subtle depth that wasn't present during initial blending. A gentle joke drifts through your thoughts. Congratulations, you've now officially aged your swamp into elegance. The humor is quiet but satisfying, a reminder that patience, though sometimes tedious, is a crucial ingredient in creation. Fact: the cooling process also ensured that the viscosity of oils and pastes stabilized. Properly rested perfumes adhered better to skin, hair, and clothing, a practical consideration for ancient users navigating hot, arid climates. The Egyptians weren't just crafting scent, they were engineering endurance. As you adjust a few jars to ensure they're level and undisturbed, You notice the interplay of scents in the room. The sweet and earthy fragrances form a gentle cloud that hangs in the air, subtle yet immersive. Each inhalation reminds you of marshes, markets, and meticulous labor, binding the sensory experience of gathering, grinding, and blending into a cohesive whole. Quirky note: some workshops reportedly used small, sealed trial jars to monitor fragrance development, tasting or sniffing intermittently to assess maturation. Historians still debate whether this was common practice, but the idea of apprentices wandering the room with noses pressed to tiny vessels is charmingly human. You settle back, letting the scents envelop you. The jars, now resting quietly, seem almost sentient, each carrying the history of the plants, the hands that worked them, and the marshes and markets from which they came. You inhale one last time, realizing that the patient, gentle process of creation has yielded not just perfume, but a tangible connection to centuries of Egyptian craftsmanship and care. Once the jars have rested, it's time for the final inspection and polishing of the vessels. You lift each clay jar carefully, rotating it in your hands, checking for cracks, imperfections, or residue on the rim. The perfumer points out tiny flaws, and you wipe or smooth them away with a soft cloth. Even minor blemishes could compromise the fragrance or suggest carelessness, and in ancient Egypt, attention to detail was a reflection of both skill and respect for the materials. Mainstream fact: perfume jars were not merely functional, they were often decorated and polished to enhance presentation. A smooth, well-finished jar communicated quality and care, reinforcing the value of its contents. The Egyptians understood that aesthetics mattered, even in seemingly mundane tools. Quirky tidbit: some workshops reportedly inscribe brief blessings or the perfumer's initials on jars before sealing, perhaps as a mark of pride or ownership over the creation. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions were widespread or limited to ceremonial batches, but the notion of tiny signatures on perfume vessels is oddly charming. You carefully pick up a jar filled with the lotus-heavy blend and tilt it to catch the sunlight filtering through the lattice. The light glimmers on the surface of the thick oil, highlighting faint streaks of resin. You breathe in the aroma and notice how mellow it has become during settling. What was once raw and sharp now carries an elegant, almost ethereal quality, as if the marsh and market have quietly whispered to each other in the intervening hours. A small joke drifts through your mind. You've officially transformed a muddy marsh into bottled sophistication. Bravo! The humor is gentle but satisfying, acknowledging both the labor and the alchemy inherent in your work. Fact: final inspection often involved assessing both aroma and texture. Perfumes that were too thick could be difficult to apply, while overly fluid blends might separate or evaporate too quickly. Egyptians mastered the subtle interplay between consistency, scent, and longevity, producing fragrances that endured through time and heat. You polish the jar's exterior gently, noting how it gleams softly in the workshop's diffuse light. The act of care extends beyond function. It communicates pride, attention, and reverence for the materials and process. Even the smallest jar carries a story of labor, patience, and intimacy with the natural world. Quirky note: some perfumers added tiny touches like lotus petals or small incense shavings on the jar's rim before sealing, creating a first impression aroma upon opening. Historians still debate the prevalence of this practice, but the idea of adding a flourish to surprise and delight the future user is delightfully human. As you move through the row of jars, inhaling the complex, harmonious fragrances rising in soft waves, you realize the full arc of the process, from swamp to market to workshop to final polished vessel, is complete. Each jar represents hours of patience, careful observation, and gentle coaxing of nature's gifts. You breathe deeply, letting the scents settle in your senses, a sensory reward for meticulous labor, and a quiet reminder that even the humblest ingredients can yield beauty with care and attention. With the jars polished and inspected, it's time to prepare for transport and gifting. You carefully wrap each vessel in soft linen, sometimes adding small aromatic sachets of dried lotus petals or herbs to complement the perfume inside. The wrapping is gentle, deliberate, almost ceremonial, ensuring that the delicate oils and resins will not spill or lose potency during travel. You notice how the soft fabric itself absorbs faint hints of scent, creating a subtle, secondary aroma that will greet the receiver even before the jar is opened. Mainstream fact: Egyptians frequently used linen to wrap perfumes and ointments for transport or gifting. The fabric protected fragile jars while also serving as a medium to carry residual fragrance. This dual-purpose approach highlights their clever use of everyday materials in specialized crafts. Quirky tidbit: some workshops included tiny notes or charms tucked into the folds of the linen, often invoking blessings for protection, luck, or good scent. Historians still debate whether these were practical or symbolic, but the idea of a tiny scent talisman traveling with your perfume adds a whimsical touch. You finish wrapping the last jar and place it carefully into a reed basket lined with more linen. The combined scent of all the jars, lotus, calamus, marjoram, myrrh, creates a gentle cloud that drifts around your hands and arms. It's immersive, almost like holding a miniature marsh, market, and workshop in your palms. You pause to inhale, letting the aroma wash over you, a sensory reward for meticulous labor. Fact: transport of perfumes was taken seriously, especially for trade or gifts intended for temples or nobles. Clay jars were packed carefully to avoid breakage and protect their precious contents. In some cases, jars were stacked in sand or straw to cushion them, showing attention not only to fragrance, but also to preservation during journeys. A small joke drifts into your mind. Congratulations, you're now a Marsh-based logistics expert. It's a quiet humor, acknowledging the care and ceremony involved in moving the jars safely without diminishing their value. You place the basket near the workshop's entrance, imagining a noble messenger or apprentice later carrying it across the streets, markets, or desert paths. The faint scents clinging to the linen will hint at the treasures inside, tantalizing anyone who passes by. The act of wrapping and preparing for delivery is the final human touch, connecting labor, care, and anticipation. Quirky note: some sources hint at perfumers arranging jars in a specific order, aligning scents in a way that created a harmonious scent gradient when unwrapped. Historians still debate whether this was purely aesthetic or practical, but it's a delightful detail to imagine, each jar a gentle, aromatic surprise for its recipient. As you step back, the workshop quiets. Mortars, jars, and linens bear the faint imprint of hours of patient, attentive work. The marsh, the market, and your hands have converged to create something that is at once ephemeral and enduring, ready to travel beyond this room and touch lives elsewhere. You inhale one last deep breath, savoring the layered scents, feeling the satisfaction of a process completed with care, precision, and quiet reverence. With the jars wrapped and prepared, You turn your attention to documenting the batch. Using a soft reed brush and ink, you carefully record the ingredients, ratios, and intended uses on a papyrus sheet. Each line is precise, detailing the types of lotus, calamus, marjoram, and myrrh used, along with the chosen carrier oils and any additives. This record is both practical and ceremonial. It ensures reproducibility, preserves knowledge for apprentices, and in a way honors the plants that contributed to the final product. Mainstream fact: Egyptians meticulously documented perfume recipes, sometimes including quantities, sources, and preparation techniques. This careful record-keeping allowed for consistent quality across batches and centuries, reflecting an early form of quality control. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers added personal commentary, small doodles, or poetic notes describing the fragrance. Historians still debate whether these flourishes were purely decorative or functional, but imagining tiny lotus sketches along the margins of a recipe is charming and humanizes the ancient craft. You step back and breathe deeply, the aromas of lotus, calamus, and myrrh blending gently with the faint scent of ink and papyrus. Recording the batch feels almost ritualistic, connecting past and present, your hands tracing symbols centuries old, your nose surrounded by the fragrance of labor and nature. Fact: detailed documentation also supported trade. Perfumes exported to distant cities or sent as gifts to temples required clear records to guarantee that the recipient would experience the intended aroma and quality. This practice demonstrates the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of commerce and craftsmanship. A gentle joke crosses your mind. Congratulations, you're now a scented historian. It's light, a reminder that even the administrative aspects of perfume making carry quiet dignity and fascination. You arrange the papyrus sheet alongside the basket of jars, considering how the record will be referenced by future perfumers or apprentices. Each entry, each symbol, each tiny note preserves not just instructions, but the story of creation, the hours spent grinding, blending, heating, and coaxing scents from marsh plants into something transcendent. Quirky note: some workshops reportedly added small scented markers, tiny bits of petals or resin, to the documentation, creating a faintly aromatic guide to the perfume. Historians still debate prevalence, but the concept of a fragrant instruction manual is both whimsical and practical. As you glance around the workshop, you notice the quiet symphony of labor complete. Mortars emptied, cloths hung, jars polished, linen wrapping softening, and ink drying. The air remains rich with aroma, a gentle reminder that creation is both ephemeral and enduring. You inhale one last time, feeling the culmination of hours of patient work settle gently in your senses. Finally, the last task is reflection and ritual closure. You sit quietly among the jars, baskets, and papyrus sheets, letting the workshop's lingering scents envelop you. The sticky, fragrant air carries lotus, calamus, marjoram, and myrrh in a subtle, harmonious symphony. You close your eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, aware that the labor of hours, perhaps even days, has transformed humble marsh plants into vessels of human creativity, devotion, and sensory delight. Mainstream fact: Egyptian perfumers often concluded their work with a quiet moment to honor the materials, themselves, and sometimes the gods. This practice reinforced the sacred connection between nature, craft, and ritual use, reminding artisans that creation was as much spiritual as it was practical. Quirky tidbit: some workshops reportedly included a small farewell gesture, like sprinkling petals on the final batch, murmuring a blessing, or playing soft music to signal the work's completion. Historians still debate the prevalence and purpose, but imagining tiny ceremonial touches in an otherwise methodical process is both endearing and humanizing. You run a hand along a line of jars, feeling the smooth, slightly sticky surfaces, noting the faint differences in weight, texture, and aroma. Each one tells a story of careful grinding, patient filtering, gentle heat, blending, and resting. You inhale slowly, letting the fragrances wash over you. Marshes, markets, and meticulous labor intertwined. Fact: completion rituals weren't purely symbolic. They often allowed perfumers to assess the final product one last time, ensuring balance, stability, and harmony before dispatch. Egyptians understood that scent could evolve even after blending, and a final period of quiet observation helped anticipate future changes. A small joke flits through your mind. All hail the marshes and markets. Your efforts are now immortalized in jars. It's a quiet humor, acknowledging both toil and triumph in a softly amusing way. You look around at the tools of your work: mortars, cloths, warmed oils, and scattered petals, recognizing that while the workshop will eventually empty, the scents will linger in memory and practice. Every stir, dab, and gentle swirl has contributed to a creation that is ephemeral yet enduring, humble yet transcendent. Quirky note: some perfumers supposedly left tiny traces of fragrant oils on workshop surfaces, a subtle signature of the day's work. Historians still debate whether this was intentional or incidental, but the idea of a space subtly perfumed by its own labor adds warmth to the narrative. As sunlight filters through latticework and the shadows shift slowly across the floor, you sit quietly, taking one final deep breath. The jars are ready, the records completed, and the marshes and markets distilled into a sensory treasure. You feel the gentle satisfaction of labor finished, of beauty created, and of history honored. The day winds down in a hush of scented warmth. You lean back, letting the lingering aromas, lotus, calamus, marjoram, myrrh, wash over you like a gentle river. Time seems to stretch and soften. Minutes feel like hours and hours like moments. The workshop hums quietly, every surface holding a trace of labor, care, and subtle fragrance. Your hands still carry the soft stickiness of oils, a tactile reminder of hours spent coaxing nature into something both ephemeral and enduring. Outside, the sun filters through the lattice, casting slow golden patterns across the floor. The air carries faint hints of the marsh beyond the city and the bustling market nearby, mingling imperceptibly with the gentle, human-altered sense of the workshop. You notice how everything, from the smallest jar to the faintest swirl of smoke from a dying fire, feels alive, vibrating softly with history, patience, and quiet magic. You close your eyes and inhale deeply, imagining the journey of these perfumes, from marsh to workshop, from hands to jars, from creation to ritual, trade, and temple ceremonies. Every note is a reminder that beauty is crafted with patience, care, and a touch of reverence for the materials themselves. The sticky resins, delicate petals, and earthy oils have become something transcendent, a sensory bridge between past and present. Your breathing slows as you absorb the calm of this space. Even the faint, lingering humor of tiny lotus grievances or whimsical trial strips blends into the warmth, a gentle reminder that history is human, delicate, and occasionally playful. The workshop fades softly around you, leaving only memory and scent, a quiet comfort to carry into dreams. You feel your eyelids grow heavier, each breath calmer, each moment softer. Let the marsh, the market, and the careful hands of ancient artisans lull you into rest. The work is complete, the jars are sealed, and all that remains is peace, warmth, and the gentle embrace of scented memory.